onto the digestive system. What do we know about the digestive system? It digests. What's it digest?
Food.
Food.
Enzymes.
It produces enzymes for digestion, right? For metabolism. What else?
Outside.
Oh yeah, right. It's actually outside. All of the interior tubing is exposed to the environment.
Absorbs
All the way through.
nutrients into the bloodstream.
Hmm?
Absorbs nutrients into the
It absorbs nutrients in the bloodstream. It does indeed. Where does that happen?
small
Yeah.
test.
Small intestine. Okay, good. Good. Yeah, so the digestive system is really all about getting nutrients from the food we eat, extracting those nutrients, delivering them to the circulatory system, and then delivering them essentially to the liver. And the liver is going to process all those things. So they make more proteins, break things down, build things up. In the case of the digestive system, the liver's primary job is to produce bile. And bile is essential for processing lipids. Nutrients are absorbed, and then we get rid of the waste. That's the other part of the digestive system. Take in the nutrients, move the waste out. Foodstuffs are disassembled, absorbed, and then assimilated. 24 to 36 hours, you might recognize that you have a big meal, change in your diet. You see that will change in 24 to 36, usually 24 hours, that you fully process the food and might change your fecal material for a little while. By the way, if you have kids or you know kids, and you want to have fun with them, in our shell there is a article on different kinds of poop. Like, why does poop look this way, or what produces this color of poop, or this texture of poop? Poop that floats or poop that doesn't float. It's fun for kids. Poop talk is, kids are wild about poop talk. Yes. So today we spend time looking at the gross anatomy and histology. We're going to talk about the mechanical and chemical aspects of it and the regulation of it. And really, where is our regulation going to be coming from? Sympathetic, parasympathetic, but parasympathetic mostly because it's the rest and digest portion of the autonomic nervous system. And we have multiple structures that are involved in this whole process, as you are well aware, because you started looking at these things this morning. We have an oral cavity. Within the oral cavity, we have a tongue, which is considered an accessory organ to the digestive system. We have teeth. They are considered accessories to the digestive system. We have salivary glands, considered accessories to the digestive system. Salivary glands produce the saliva. We take food in through the mouth. We mash it up by shoving it around our mouth with the tongue, get it between our teeth, crunch, 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 and then we create a ball called a bolus that eventually ends up at the back of the base of the tongue, and it triggers your swallow reflex. And once it hits that swallow reflex, it's going down. You're not stopping it. It goes down the esophagus, passes through the thorax in a space known as what? Begins with an M?
Mediastinum.
Mediastinum, right? So the esophagus sends that food down into the stomach. Our stomach produces gastric juices with a lot of hydrochloric acid. That hydrochloric acid makes that gastric juice really acidic. The stomach does a lot of mixing and churning, and this is actually the first place where we have chemical digestion in real. We see a little bit of chemical digestion up here because these salivary glands, parietal in particular, produce some amylase, which again is why when you eat potato chips, they get converted to sugar almost immediately, and you're like, love potato chips. Stomach, from the stomach to our duodenum, from our duodenum to the jejunum, from the jejunum to the ileum, from the ileum to the large intestine. Large intestine starts with the cecum and the appendix, and then ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, and anus. Pancreas, tucked up under the stomach, accessory organ. Liver, accessory organ. Appendix, accessory organ. all part of the digestive system. And you can call it the alimentary canal or the alimentary tract. You can call it the digestive tract. But if you call it the gastrointestinal, you're eliminating everything above the stomach, because gastro refers to stomach. The rest is right. Yeah?
Is the pancreas, appendix, and the liver the only accessory organs that, like...
In the abdomen. Oh, gallbladder. Sorry, not gallbladder. Yeah, gallbladder. Gallbladder's job is to store the bile that the liver produces. All right. So functions include, obviously, the ingestion, taking that food in, and then processing that food, the digestion. There's mechanical digestion, and there's chemical digestion. What do you think would be a good example of mechanical digestion? Chewing, exactly, chewing, mechanical movement. In the stomach, you have rugal folds. You're producing that gastric juice in the stomach. So there's some chemical digestion, but we also have mechanical digestion in the stomach, because this is so interesting. Instead of just 2 layers of smooth muscle, the stomach has 3 layers of smooth muscle. There is a circular layer, there's a longitudinal layer, and a transverse layer. 3 layers, which means that you get pretty comprehensive compression.
Peristalsis? Is it peristalsis?
Peristalsis. Yep. Chemical digestion is going to use enzymes, but also that hydrochloric acid is a biggie, especially for the beginning digestion, the beginning metabolism of proteins in the stomach. In the digestive system, we absorb those materials through the villi. Remember the villi, the columnar epithelium surrounding the villi. Columnar epithelium absorb the materials from the lumen of the intestine. This is a fluid now, where you have amino acids ultimately, and you have glucose ultimately, and fructose ultimately, and you have things called micelles, which are going to be absorbed through the enterocytes and then shipped to the lymphatic system. Absorption of the materials through the epithelium, interstitial fluid, and then the blood, or the lymph, as in the case of fats. Compaction happens at the distal end of this tract through the large intestine. Ultimately, you defecate that waste material out. Hopefully you're defecating, because if you don't, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Which reminds me of an old joke from grade school about all the organs that claimed to be the boss until it came to the anus. And the anus said, "Watch what happens when I shut down." I just paraphrased there. Ultimately, all along this track, you have protection. And we've talked about the lymph nodules that you see in increased frequency along the length of the track. And you also have changes in your epithelium. So stratified squamous in the mouth, good protection. We have, in our saliva, defensins. So we got lysozymes and defensins. Lysozymes for beating back potential pathogenic bacteria that are on the food we just chewed. We have those lymph nodules all along the length on that stomach acid. Not much can survive a pH of 1 or 2. Yeah.
How much stomach acid is in our stomach? Is it like all of it, or is it just like a little bit of liquid?
Sort of in the middle.
Middle. Okay.
And of course it depends
Uh-huh.
on what you're eating, whether you're eating. Yeah. Less if you haven't eaten, because that's part of the gastric reflux.
Okay.
Yeah. The production of those acids. But then there are some people who still produce too much, and they take acids, like omeprazole, to cut off those hydrogen pumps that are part of the production of the acid. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so here's where we get the name, alimentary canal, this tube, part of the exterior, but everything is going to travel around this tube. Even if it's torturous, it's still open on both ends. And we've already talked about our accessory organs. Teeth are accessory organs, tongue accessory organs, salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Very essential, but not part of the tube.
So it's just either tube or attached to tube.
Yep, tube or participating in the process.
Right. Okay. So
Not necessarily
accessory
attached.
makes it seem like it's not as important.
Oh
but they're
no,
just
that's not the case at all.
Right. It just means they're not the tube.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly. Well, you would be in a world of hurt without the pancreas.
Yeah. Right. Or the liver.
World of hurt,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So when you are thinking about it, you may use this term alimentary canal, you may use digestive tract. Think about it, when you say gastrointestinal, you're referring to just a portion of the whole. All right. Then in lab, we started to talk about how we have 4 basic layers for this tube. The tube starting at the mouth and ending at the anus. 4 basic layers. You have a mucosa, you have a submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa, the visceral peritoneum. And in our mucosa, remember we have the villi. This is showing you sort of a transverse view, oblique view of the villus, covered, villi, covered with their columnar epithelial cells. And tucked up into each villi is a lamina propria. And within the lamina propria, we have the capillary beds, arterial and venual, and the lacteals, the lymphatic vessel. Ducts, because we have seromucous glands that are producing mucus, that are going to coat the surface of these villi because we need to take care of these columnar epithelial cells, which are going to be replaced anyway, every 5 to 6 days, believe it or not. The submucosa is where our blood vessels are housed, and we have this 2 layers of smooth muscle. One is a longitudinal layer, and one is a circular layer. And how are you going to remember longitudinal is closer to the outer surface than the circular? How are you going to remember that? I don't know, I haven't come up with a good way yet.
Oh.
Sorry, can't help you. Longitudinal outside.
A long way away.
Long way away, okay.
A long way away from the lumen.
No, good. I worked that. I like that. Did you hear her say that? A long way away from the lumen. L, L, L. Okay, good. Circular on the inside. Circular going this way, longitudinal the length.
Were the lacteals within lymphatic vessel, or are they their own thing?
The lacteals are the lymphatic
They
vessels.
are lymphatic vessels.
We also have some nerve tissue, which they call the enteric nervous system. Maybe you heard about that in 231. And they think it's really beyond the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. We have an enteric nervous system. We didn't combine them. We didn't segregate. But we have a myenteric plexus, myenteric plexus, and a submucosal plexus, delivering parasympathetic fibers. Okay. The mucosa, as you might imagine, is very important because it is exposed to the lumen of the tube. And everything that's coming down that lumen is hitting those mucosal cells, the columnar epithelial cells. And so our tube, remember, starts at the mouth, ends at the anus. We have different epithelium along the way. In the mouth, it makes total sense to have stratified squamous epithelium. Protection. We eat things that are really rough. We eat things that are really hot, things that are really cold. So we're going to have nice protective stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized for the most part, in the mouth. There is a little bit of keratinization on the hard palate, and there's a little bit of keratinization around the edge of the gingiva, the gums. But the rest is non-keratinized, stratified squamous of your mucous membranes, the cheeks, your inner cheeks, the buccal surface of the cheeks. That non-keratinized stratified squamous travels down the esophagus, so from the oral cavity through the oral pharynx, down the esophagus. We saw that in histology this morning. Once we hit the stomach, simple columnar, rest of the way down. until we get to the rectum and anus. Then we see transition again. This epithelium, obviously for protection. Obviously. We produce a lot of mucus. This is a mucous membrane, produce a lot of mucus, added protection. We have goblet cells specific for producing mucus along the length of our tract. And you will see increase in goblet cells as you get farther down the line. Because as you get farther down the line, that material in the tube gets stickier and stickier and stickier until it becomes a formed fecal matter. And even then, we need goblet cells to move that along. We have cells that are producing enzymes and some cells that are producing hormones within the digestive tract, all the way down the line. And we're going to identify those enteroendocrine cells as we go. We absorb saccharides, monosaccharides, sugar, glucose, and fructose particularly. We absorb the amino acids. They're like the simplest. And we absorb the lipids, but we have a contorted mechanism for getting the lipids going. We have on the surface of these villi, and on the surface of the columnar epithelial cells that are covering the villi, we have something called a brush border. And it's the microvilli that are increasing surface area to absorb as many of the nutrients from that food that you've eaten as possible. Increased surface area, increased ability to absorb. Because I don't know about you, but I spend a significant amount of money at the grocery store. I had to go to the grocery store, first of all, and I had to be in the grocery store. Spend my money on the food. I want to get as much out of that food as possible. Yep. So from the epithelium, we have the lamina propria. Lamina propria. And that lamina propria, blood vessels like teals, maybe malt. Do you know what the M stands for? Mucosal. Associated. Lymphatic tissue. Yep. From the lamina propria, we have a dividing line called the muscularis mucosa. A little strip of smooth muscle. It helps add to the wrinkling of the intestinal lumen, which increases surface area. The more surface area, the more absorption. Here's another image of what we've just been talking about in terms of layers. So here is our mucosa. Right? There's our lamina propria. These are lymphatic nodules. There's the lumen of the intestine. And what they're depicting here are those villi that are poking out into the lumen. From the mucosa, we have a simple, thin layer of smooth muscle called the muscularis mucosa. And this muscularis mucosa is separating the mucosa from the submucosa. You see where the submucosa has its glands? Those glands are then exocrine glands delivering mucus to the surface of the lumen of the intestine. Here's our submucosal plexus. Here's our muscularis externa, longitudinal layer, circular layer, and our myenteric plexus. And lastly, our serosa. In the submucosa, loose irregular connective tissue, adipose, right? Some dense irregular connective tissue makes total sense. You want to have something nice and strong dealing with this stuff because we're having this and this and this and this. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Lots of movement. Lots of movement. Talk about the exocrine glands and the malt. From that submucosa, here, we go to our muscularis externa, circular layer and longitudinal layer. Tucked in between that, you have your myenteric plexus, so nerve innervation. As this says, we have 2 layers of the tube, but we have 3 layers on the stomach. Oblique, longitudinal, circular. I think it's longitudinal outside, circular middle, oblique, or transverse inside. all of this musculature is important for moving things down the line through peristalsis. The serosa is the visceral peritoneum, and if it's a visceral peritoneum, then it is a serous membrane, and that means that it is areolar connective tissue with a little bit of elastin and simple squamous epithelium and adipose that is covering the surface of that tube, producing a little serous fluid, because we noticed that your small intestine is tortuous. It's layered and layered and, folds and folds and folds. We want to be able to allow those loops of intestine to move, because sometimes you have gas moving through there. Have you ever had gas? No. Anybody here never had gas? Never? Lucky you. You want that gas to be able to move through, because it's uncomfortable. Yeah. And so we always have this movement of our small intestine, got to be able to slip and slide on itself, and that's what those serous membranes allow for. That's reducing friction. I love this image the best because it's the most realistic. And so we've talked about our mucosa. Here's our mucosa. There's our villi. So these little lumps are the villi. But see this ridge right here? This is representing this, which is called the plica circularis. Plica circularis, or pleats or folds. These are permanent. They don't change. They provide additional surface area. So you have these ridges all the way down the length of the tube, and the ridges are covered with our mucosa, which is covered with villi, which is covered with columnar epithelium, which is covered with microvilli. Mucosa. Here's our muscularis mucosa right there, muscularis mucosa right there. And then we have our submucosa, muscularis externa, serosa.
Heather?
Yeah,
This is the small intestine, or stomach? What is it?
small intestine.
Small intestine.
Yep.
Because it has a microvilli.
Has microvilli. Mm-hmm. Yep. This is the last thing we're going to talk about. I've run out of steam.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we know that we have this big cavity, the peritoneum. And the peritoneum has serous membranes associated with it. There's a parietal peritoneum and a visceral peritoneum. And the parietal peritoneum is lining the walls of the abdomen, and the visceral peritoneum is sitting on the surface of abdominal viscera, but not all of the loops, not all of the abdominal viscera are included in the peritoneum, which is very odd. And the structures that are not included in the abdomen and in the peritoneum include the descending colon, ascending colon. Look, our parietal peritoneum is sitting on the surface of that, but it's also not included in the whole. The aorta, not included in the peritoneum. Vena cava, not included in the peritoneum. Pancreas, not included in the peritoneum. This isn't showing that region right there, but we're going to talk about that. Duodenum, not included in the peritoneum. Kidneys, not included in the peritoneum. But all the loops of small intestine, one edge of the stomach, one edge of the liver are touched by the peritoneum. So this is showing you the parietal peritoneum. We also have some other membranes, which we started to talk about this morning in lab. The greater omentum and the lesser omentum and the mesocolon are all membranes involved in the abdominal cavity. The mesenteries are typically found connected to the small intestine. I don't know if when we did the rat dissection, do any of you remember when we did the rat dissection, did we pull out the intestine and I showed you that
You showed us
really thin?
That was the first time I heard of what a mesentery is.
Yeah,
I was
good.
like, what the heck is that?
Remember, so we pull out the small intestine, we have that sheet of connective tissue that held all those loops in place. The mesentery served as a route for arterial blood, venous return, lymphatics, and nerve innervation, mesentery. Sometimes our loops of intestine can have problems within the abdominal peritoneum. And these are some of the things that can happen to the loops of intestine. One is referred to as a volvulus. You imagine taking a piece of the intestine and then picking it up and looping it, turning it, twisting it like that. You have strangulation of all of the tissue beyond that strangulation point. Volvulus is problematic. Another thing that can happen to our intestine is something called an intussusception, where one part of the tube gets tucked into another part of the tube. You can see
Sucked
it
in?
tucked in right there. Yeah, tucked in. Could be sucked in, but I don't know how it gets there.
I was gonna say, how does that happen?
I don't
That's what
know.
I was saying. And I think they say it's a
Yes,
problem with babies.
Carly.
So it was the greater omentum, lesser omentum, and lesser omentum?
Mesentery. Mesentery, and then the mesocolon. So these are all the connective tissue structures found in the abdomen. Yeah. And another way that we can get a problem with our intestine is called a hernia. And a loop of intestine slips out of the abdominal wall. You know, you have an umbilical cord that was attached to you. You have an umbilicus. Well, there's a little hole there. There was a bigger hole. Most of it closed down. I learned a few years ago, because of kidney stones, that I have a very small umbilical hernia. Not big enough for any loop to get through, so I'm not worried about it. Kind of interesting though. All right, so this is more of those membranes as we go along. Here is our greater omentum. Here's our lesser omentum. You can see that the lesser omentum is on the lesser curvature of the stomach and is attached to the body wall. Our greater omentum attached to the greater curvature of the stomach, and it loops over and then attaches to the transverse colon. So it is a sheet, double layered sheet. The greater omentum, this is much better, much more realistic view of it, is used for storing lipids. And it's got a lot of connective tissue, adipose tissue, and blood supply, of course. And if you flip it up and you look at the colon, you see our mesocolon. It's essentially the same thing as our mesentery, but it's attached to the colon rather than the small intestine. Just one last thing, here it is in real life. There's our greater omentum, there's our lesser omentum, here's our mesocolon, here's our mesentery. Lovely. And that's where we're stopping today. Yay.